I'm going to be reading Our Brains Have Been Impounded by Our Hearts by Chillylover. Chapter 1, How to Treat a Hostage. The two of us will surely crack the secrets behind the petrobeam and the moon, Zeno declared deep from his chest. No need to delay. Senku waved his friend out of the room. Chrome whined as he stalled behind everyone else. Pout and pleading eyes begged Senku to let him stay in on the Science Pro's secret meeting. This was the event of the millennium, a must-see. Senku assured him that he'd be included some other time, and that seemed to be somewhat satisfactory. Senku lingered at the door, peeking out the port to confirm everyone had cleared. He hummed, the leather seat creaking under his weight. And as he placed himself across from his old mentor, silence fell over the salon. The large windows displayed the murky river. Streaks of white danced over the surface as the pale clouds and shining sun bled over its dark waves. Zeno readjusted, gravitating his student's attention back to him, his eyes much like the scenery. Senku leaned in. Sure, we've got time now. The prospect of finally getting to have this conversation sparked a fervor through the young scientist. So, let's you and me, mentor and mentee, exchange everything we know so far. The man he once sought guidance from, now his hostage, reciprocated this passion very well, because science is elegant. Finally, they had a moment alone, face to face. It was early morning. Neither man had gotten much rest last night in the commotion of the escape, but neither felt fatigued. The thrill of the previous day and the anticipation of days ahead invigorated them. Senku broke the ice. It's been a real long time, Dr. Zeno. The older man nodded, his disposition hard to read. A long time coming, yes. Yet at this moment, nearly 4,000 years had felt like no time at all. If only it had been under different circumstances, he said wistfully. Zeno repressed his sentiments from when he learned Senku had evaded his attempt on his life, vowing to never tell of what transpired in his mind the moment "do it" slipped from his lips. This fondness for his mentee was his Achilles' heel, and this war wasn't over yet. For sure, Senku dipped his head. I don't like when things come to this. Zeno leaned back and spoke reassuringly. I don't fault you, Senku. You've only done what's necessary in order to win this conflict. He looked down his nose at him, though taking me hostage is a grave mistake. This ominous comment sent a chill through Senku. Why's that? The young scientist inquired, having a feeling he already knew the answer. Stan may have failed to kill you the first attempt, but he'll succeed the second. He doesn't accept failure. Senku pressed his lips then, looking past Zeno as he thought. Then his eyes darted back to meet his. Do you want me to die? He asked matter-of-factly. Zeno went still. He had no intention of answering. Why don't you tell me about your journey so far? What's led up to this very moment? I'm curious. Senku let out a heavy sigh, the weight of his past making him slump in his chair. Zeno noted his hesitancy to divulge. Why don't you start from the beginning then, when you broke out of the stone? He asked in a manner reminiscent of a therapist. Senku could only hope this wouldn't turn into a therapy session. It easily could. Well, I depetrified April 1st, 5738. Zeno's lips parted in silent awe. What about you, Zeno? I'm assuming around the same time, since you stayed conscious too. You know the date, he questioned breathlessly. Senku nodded, wondering to himself what was so shocking about that. How do you know that? A smile tugged at the corner of his lips when he realized. I counted. Somehow, even Zeno, of all people, could still be dumbfounded by the things he himself didn't give much mind to. Zeno's jaw dropped, a glimmer in his eyes. At a loss for words, he stared up at the ceiling, looking for what he wanted to say. Tell me, what is today's date, Senku? December 1st, 5741. Zeno lit up. Oh, truly elegant, Senku. A strange, squeal-like sound of excitement piped from the older scientist. His eyes, wild, a tinge of red bloomed on his cheeks. Just as quickly as he had lost his composure, he reeled it back in. Zeno cleared his throat. Only you could accomplish something so prestigious, he praised. Senku had gotten plenty of admiration for the things he had done before, but Zeno was pretty much admitting that he had outdone him. He felt himself soften. There was still a part of him that felt giddy to be praised by the NASA scientist he looked up to way back when. Senku shrugged, attempting to mask his sudden bashfulness. Not all that much you can do, petrified. Figured I might as well use my time efficiently. Zeno muttered more words of affirmation, causing his student to fidget. Quickly, Senku wanted to change the subject. He gave him the rundown of the members of the crew and how he came to know them, keeping it surface level and factual, as if he was describing the life of someone else. Zeno figured this was a strategic choice, as to not reveal any potential dynamics to exploit. Nevertheless, he could tell Senku had accomplished many seemingly impossible feats, all with the power of science. Zeno butted in. How did you discover the revival fluid? I feel you glossed over that part, Senku. Oh, Senku really hadn't meant to omit it. He actually did want to discuss it with him. When I depetrified, I was by myself for a while, so after getting my basic needs met, I started trying to figure out how to replicate it. I needed to find out how to revive people. I probably wouldn't have survived for much longer all on my own. Zeno finished his thought, which is why you discovered the revival fluid and I did not. But I have my reasons for why I came to the conclusion I did. He paused for a moment. Senku wondered if he was doing it for dramatic effect, or if the cogs were just turning. Finally, after some mental preparation, Zeno began. The CDC had conducted experiments in the days prior to the petrification, which yielded significant results. They had consulted me, so I was aware there was a slight ion overflow when nitric acid was introduced to the stone swallows. Using glass wool soaked in nitric acid as the terminal and a potentiometer to measure voltage, there were the slightest electrical signals being outputted, a very slight potential difference, appearing only around the head. I deduced them to be brainwaves. While in the stone, I theorized that since I was in Pinnacles National Park, a place filled with saltpeter caves, meaning nitric acid, that the chemical had to have some involvement in the process when I ultimately broke out of the stone. I followed this hypothesis and searched the nearby caves, where I had indeed found ionized nitric minerals, as I suspected I would. So, using this prior knowledge of the swallow's measured brain waves, with my own maintained brain functioning, and the evidence that my statue had indeed come in contact with an amount of nitric acid, I concluded that sustained brain activity was necessary for depetrification, as the energy expended from brain activity over a long period of time was slowly breaking down the stone. Nitric acid, as a corrosive agent, merely speeds up the process. Zeno's lips seemed to blur, as the world did around him as he rambled a mile a minute. Senku absorbed every last word. He had leaned in, holding his chin in deep consideration. Brain activity plus nitric acid equals depetrification. I don't fault you for sticking to that. You had sound evidence that worked. Huh? You actually let me finish? Zeno mused to himself. Senku straightened his posture, crossing his arms. But I wasn't satisfied with the conclusion that anyone who didn't stay conscious couldn't be helped. I gathered all the stone swallows I could find and pretty much threw everything at them, just to see what would happen. Eventually I decided to try Nidal. Every problem has a solution, no matter how much of a pain in the ass that answer can be. A bit of an inelegant method, yet effective, Zeno hummed. Considering that at the time I lacked any modern equipment, I figured that any test I could try to do would be unreliable, as well as I had a couple dozen people I needed to feed and shelter, so I've only recently had more time I could dedicate to research and experimentation. Senku's fingers drummed against his chin as he considered a question he really wanted an answer to. A part of him felt like Zeno wouldn't give him a straight answer, though. He let out a deep sigh. Senku had managed to get him talking, so maybe it was worth a shot. He didn't even know if there were other people who had broken out of the stone. let alone if they'd be a threat to you. Why do you stockpile like you were going to war? Zeno wished to wave off this notion, but with his hands bound, he settled to kick his leg dismissively. It'd be plain illogical to assume my people and I were the only ones on Earth who had stayed conscious in such a primitive new world. The ones with the most physical prowess are the strongest. With weaponry, the playing field is leveled, he scoffed. Humans are always seeking to gain power. It's in our nature. Senku took a moment to think about how he felt, recollecting that he indeed did say something similar to what Zeno espoused at one point in time. It was apparent his old mentor wasn't completely delusional. He was just more of an expect the worst, prepare for the worst kind of guy. Senku looked at the man across from him curiously. So did you become the leader of your group because you're just the leading type, or did you declare yourself one? Visibly his jaw clenched. Zeno went dead still. The only sign of life was the faint crease of his brows, the twist of his bottom lip. With science, the wise can guide and lead the masses. That's how I came to power. Zeno sneered, his dull eyes like black holes all-consuming. That's how you did as well, Senku, so don't pretend like you're above that. Senku matched him with a glare, his own eyes red, like a signal of danger. They told him not to continue any further. Zeno heeded the warning. The smirk fought its way onto his lips. Aren't we off track? I thought we were supposed to be talking about the Petrobeam. They observed each other wordlessly. We've got all day to do that, said Senku. Indeed we do. Zeno tilted his head, idly gazing out the windows. The sun blazed high above the picturesque sky, spreading its hazy rays across the clouds. Now the land was long behind them, and all that surrounded was the wide open ocean. Senku raised his clasped hands to his mouth as if he were in deep thought. In reality, a weak attempt to conceal a smile. He could hardly hide it. Senku was excited, even more than he had expected. The time went by much faster than the two scientists had expected. As the seabirds squawked overhead, the crew congregated up on the bridge, having quiet conversations. The sound of a teapot whistle echoed from the galley, and voices faded in and out as they passed by the entrance to the salon. Senku stood from the leather booth, stretching his stiff muscles with a groan. Zeno likewise took the break in conversation as an opportunity to stretch his neck, wishing he could do the same with his arms. Senku poked his head out the door to the deck to see if who he was looking for was around. He called in Kaseki, who hoisted a sack of invitations about twice the size of his body into the room. Out of it came the record player, the glass record containing Byakuya's message placed delicately on it. Of course, Senku had told Zeno the story about Ishigami Village and its origins, but it was nice to hear some proof confirming it. Zeno hadn't known Byakuya that well, but he had spent a considerable amount of time with him, enough to know what type of man he was, and it wasn't hard to empathize with Senku, knowing he was long dead. But with the crucial information that from space Byakuya had witnessed the Petrobeam started in South America, the two could start calculating the exact location of where it originated from. To get started, Zeno humbly requested he be unbound to not hinder his ability in experimenting, and to relieve his sore shoulders. Senku eyed him a bit suspiciously, but all it took to convince him was Zeno saying, "What am I going to do? Jump off and swim back to America?" And they got to work, Chrome sneaking in to join them eventually. Seeing Zeno untied, Chrome practically announced it to the entire crew in his shock. By dinner time, they determined the origin, delicately picking up his scientific model with metal claws. Zeno packed them into a box, if needed for later use. Senku had left, heading up to the helm to inform Ryusui of the precise destination. Of course, the young scientist hadn't left him alone, unattended. The looming presence of Tsukasa eyed him silently from the corner of the room, stoically staring. Having gotten an abridged history of his past, Zeno was surprised Senku had actually told him about what Tsukasa had done. This affirmed his notion that a brute could and would try to cultivate power in the stone world. If Senku had prioritized weaponry, then their conflict would have ended much quicker, that was for sure. Tsukasa was once a formidable enemy, yet Senku had managed to convert him into a powerful ally, with science. Zeno caught himself smiling at the thought. Well, the creation of weapons is a science in itself, yes. Before long, the first full day out at sea drifted away. Zeno joined Senku and the rest of the crew down in the salon for dinner. He didn't feel very hungry or very welcome, so he distanced himself from the crew, watching their jovial conversation from afar. Crude jokes and obnoxious laughter echoed through the room. Their irresponsible and unrestricted drinking was a stark reminder of how he had been defeated by a gaggle of immature teens and nearly 20-somethings. His eyes darted off to the outskirts of the group where Senku stood, arms crossed sternly as he watched over everyone, perhaps to make sure no one wandered off and fell overboard in a drunken stupor. It seemed Senku was the only mature one here. Senku suddenly turned to look in Zeno's direction, sensing the older man's eyes on him. A subtle look of pity crossed his features. Zeno looked away. He didn't want it. This was his choice. But unfortunately, it wasn't his decision whether or not Senku felt bad for him. When he looked back, Senku was gone from his place, having disappeared behind the curtain into the main galley. Moments later, he was making his way towards Zeno, with 2 meat kebabs in both hands. He extended one to his mentor. "I know you didn't eat anything all day," he said. They had spent the whole day together, after all, too absorbed in their work for the thought of sustenance to cross their minds. All of a sudden, aware of the burgeoning hunger pains in his stomach, Zeno stubbornly took the kebab from his outstretched hand and nibbled on it petulantly. "You can have a drink, too, if you want," Senku offered with a small smile. "Get me drunk and spilling my guts," he scoffed. "No, thank you." Senku had expected such a response. He moved next to Zeno, resting his back on the glossy paneled wall. Zeno's disposition remained stiff, eating his kebab with an amusing seriousness. "You lurking in the shadows is kind of freaking everyone out, Zeno." Senku looked up at him, the warm light smoothing his face. "Come sit down." In his peripheral vision, Zeno caught a glimmer of his pleading look. He rejected the offer with his silence. Senku sighed and looked over at the rest of the crew around the solid wood table, happily chatting and stuffing their faces. The young scientist chewed on his food and took a good look around the room. Warm inset lighting, classy trim details on the furniture, and polished steel walls framing scenic windows, showing the shiny sea provided a pleasant atmosphere. Though, contrastingly, the cabins below deck did not follow this industrial style. Honestly, this boat was not too bad. Senku would never make it like this himself, but he could still appreciate the craftsmanship. He was sure that if he asked Zeno to describe it, he would say it was elegant. This brought an out of the blue question in his mind. "Zeno, in the old world, did you have a yacht?" "No," he answered curtly. Senku huffed. He was just trying to start a conversation with him, and Zeno was being pouty for whatever reason. "You seem like you would," he said, sounding a little more insulting than intended. Shifting in place, Zeno mumbled, "Well, my parents did." "Yeah, that kind of counts." Zeno paused to swallow his bite. "No, that one was theirs. This one is mine." Senku sighed. "Better not get too attached to it. Probably gonna get pretty beat up." "Well then, I suppose it's actually yours now." He waved it off. "I can always make another. It didn't cost me any money." "How much do you think this would have cost back then, huh?" Senku asked, trying to keep the conversation going. In honesty, he didn't really care. Jumping up from his chair, Ryusubi chimed in. "Definitely a couple million. Zeno, did you design this?" He stumbled his way over to the 2 scientists, clearly a little drunk. He snapped his fingers. "When this conflict is settled, could I commission another one from you?" "No, 100 of them. We can sell them for millions. Everyone gets a boat." He laughed boisterously. "Priorities, Ryusubi-chan," Gen sighed from the table. Ryusui looked over his shoulder. Future planning should be a priority, Senku rebuked. We still have limited resources, and we need to build more important things than 100 yachts. Zeno cocked his head in the fellow scientist's direction. What are you planning on building, Senku? I haven't heard you mention any plans, he said slickly. Ryusui suspiciously scrunched his lips and met Zeno's eyes. Why isn't he tied up, Senku? He jerked his head in his friend's direction. Senku yawned. I'm watching him. Relax. Taiju shouted with his mouth full. He literally just shot you the other week. Didn't you say you were going to tie him back up after we finished? Why is he still free? Chrome added. Above the crew's disapproved muttering, Kohaku spoke up, catching everyone's attention. What are we going to do about him tonight? Senku crossed his arms flippantly. It's all right, he's not going anywhere. Ryusui placed a hand on his shoulder, pulling him away from Zeno. He spoke gravely into his ear. It's not about him escaping. Zeno bowed his head pensively. It was too early to say Zeno was safe, wasn't it? After everyone had cleaned up and headed off to bed, Senku, Zeno, and Ryusui remained in the dining area. Zeno's eyes twitched as Ryusui pulled the ropes tight, securing the knot. You sure you want to be the one keeping watch on him? The blonde asked with a hint of concern. Senku gave a curt nod. All right then. He gestured to the tucked-away staircase in the hall that led to the lower deck. There's a large cabin down there. Doesn't connect to the rest of the crew's sleeping quarters. Yes. That one was actually intended to be mine. Zeno looked to Senku, who kept his head turned away. Quite the elegant space. You like it? Yeah, all right. You got your way in the end. Senku grabbed Zeno by the arm. Come on, old man. Past your bedtime, he teased, leading him down the tight staircase. The older man was visibly unamused by the situation. Zeno flopped down onto the bed with a grunt, his bound arms having taken the brunt of his fall. Senku kneeled onto the bed and rolled him over a couple of times until he settled at the far end of the large mattress. Glaring over at his former student, Zeno flicked his head in an attempt to fix his now unkempt hair. You can't expect me to get any ounce of sleep like this, Senku. Zeno pouted. Senku scratched his ear with his pinky finger, his expression unbothered, though he did find the scenario pretty amusing. I'll tuck you in, he offered, a smirk tugging at his lips. We were getting along so well today. Where'd that cordialness go? Zeno said haughtily. Senku, tapping his finger on his chin playfully, answered, I did tell you I was only untying you for a bit. He pulled off his tool belt, placed it on the side table, and slipped out of his shoes. He chuckled as he sat down on the bed, crisscrossing his legs. The only reason I waited until after dinner was because I didn't want to hand feed you. Exhaling a laugh through his nose, Zeno gave a slight smile at the mental image. He mulled on what to reply to that. When the words came to him, his eyes softened. I'm not going to try anything in the night. Senku nodded. I know, but it's just for peace of mind for everyone else. After a beat, he sat up, lurching over to grab the quilt folded at the foot of the bed. He unfurled it, laying it over them both. Zeno squirmed as the blanket settled on top of his body. Ugh. At least let me take my shoes off first. Between them, there was a good meter of empty space, enough to not make it awkward to share a bed and blanket. Not that Senku really cared. Senku flopped down onto the mattress. Kick him off. You can do that yourself. Unlike your primitive ones, mine are laced, he responded snobbishly. Senku rolled his eyes as he rose up. Indolently crawling over and flipping the blanket up to get access to his loafers. He swiftly pulled loose both knots on each shoe. Once finished, Senku returned to his spot with a big sigh. Zeno side-eyed the young man. He pushed his heel out of his shoe. Soon there were 2 thuds against the floor as he discarded them off the side of the bed. Senku closed his eyes, nuzzled into the pillow, and made himself comfortable. He'd hardly gotten any sleep the past couple of days due to the hectic conflict, as well as getting in a plane crash while still recovering from getting shot. Certain to say, he was more than a little tired. Senku. One red eye blinked open. He raised an eyebrow and questioned. Could you loosen my tie for me? Zeno grinned, amused with his own antics. If you'd be so kind to. Senku scrunched his nose at him, rejecting the request. Zeno rolled his head against the pillow theatrically. It's like I'm being choked. I couldn't possibly fall asleep like this. He deadpanned, flopping his head to the side. He met Senku's unamused glare. I think I'll be up all night if you don't. Senku's lips parted in confusion. Zeno was so much more unserious than he had initially struck him to be. Maybe he was always like this, and he just wasn't privy to the side of his mentor before. Are we seriously doing this? Zeno pressed his lips thin and nodded. Once again, Senku pulled the quilt off of himself and sat up. He leaned over Zeno, who in response exposed his neck to him, the gesture catching him off guard, his hand froze in place. Senku's eyes trailed up from the silky tie, over the lean muscles of Zeno's neck, and finally settled onto his face. He tried not to, but he cracked a smile at his mentor's blatant, smug expression. Zeno was just messing with him, that's all, trying to get a rise out of him. Taking hold of the article, Senku gave a prompt tug and yanked it side to side, until the knot was undone. Anything else? He asked, his tone a bit kinder than he intended. No. Senku squinted suspiciously. You sure? Yes, Zeno assured, a devilish look in his eyes, and the subtle curl of the corners of his mouth did not go unnoticed, though. Hesitantly, Senku scooched back to the side of the bed, the moment his head hit the pillow. Could I possibly have my coat removed as well? Senku composed himself, halfway between wanting to laugh and scream. I'd have to undo the ropes to do that. You've already untied my shoes and tie. What's another? Zeno remarked, his voice velvety and beguiling. Senku wasn't opposed to it. Really, he was not a fan of the idea of Zeno being restrained overnight. But right now it was obvious Zeno's ultimate goal was not only to annoy him, but to get free. Maybe he was scheming or testing his limits. Maybe he just wanted to be comfortable. Senku really couldn't tell. Though he trusted Zeno on his word, perhaps his reasons for doing so were not so logical. Senku turned to look at him. I don't know. I think you'll be all right. Zeno wouldn't meet his eyes. Just take off my coat. Tie me back up after, of course. He reasoned in almost a whisper, the soft light from the bedside lamp illuminating his face warmly, a harsh shadow of his profile cast across the upholstered walls. Zeno's eyebrows furrowed. Senku, I assure you I won't. I know, he reiterated. Zeno met his eyes. Now Senku was the one who averted his. His mouth fumbled as he tried to speak before knowing what he wished to say. I guess, weirdly enough, I'm kind of having a hard time finding a balance between treating you like an enemy and like a friend. Hanging out with Zeno today wasn't so bad. Senku hasn't had the opportunity to just sit down and talk about science like that in a long time. Just to have someone who got what he meant without needing an explanation. Of course, he didn't fault any of his friends for this. Senku was well aware that he had an above-average understanding of the subject. But man, was it fun to just be able to talk. He'd always had people in his life who would listen to him ramble about whatever projects he was up to or what he was researching and all that. They would smile and nod, but you could tell they didn't really get it. Senku loved sharing science with his friends, but he needed this badly, and he hadn't even known it until he finally got to sit down across from his old mentor. Even before, when they only spoke through emails, Senku felt like Zeno and him were on the same wavelength. Maybe that's why he still liked the guy, because they were the same but still so different. I'm not your friend, Zeno hissed, his baritone voice cutting through the silence. The bite in his words made Senku tense. Why are you permitting my blatant disrespect of your authority? Senku tried to ignore the sudden hostility. Enemy or not, I'm still going to treat you fair. Fair? Zeno sneered, seeming disgusted by the notion. You're practically rolling out the red carpet for me. You're at my beck and call, doing what you're told, he spat out. What are you getting at? Senku asked. If Zeno thinks he's making a mistake, then why is he correcting him? With a pensive gaze, Zeno muttered, I expected better from someone like you. He was right. They weren't friends. Senku didn't really know Zeno, and Zeno didn't really know Senku. But Senku wanted to. Eventually, he'd befriend him. His old mentor couldn't understand how to win a war without death, but Senku had done it before, and he was sure as hell going to do it again. That was the only option to resolve this conflict that he'd accept. Senku swallowed the lump in his throat and leaned over Zeno, a look of determination burning in his ember eyes. With the strength he could muster up, Senku turned Zeno over, making quick work of undoing the ropes that bound his arms, catching a glimpse of his bewildered face as he flipped him over again. Senku swiftly unzipped his coat, pulling it off promptly. Tossing it aside, Senku opened his arms wide, offering himself to Zeno. If I'm dumb enough to trust my enemy, are you smart enough to kill me right now? Is that what you want me to think? Zeno's wide eyes bore into him. Then his expression soured, licking his lips as a malicious laugh crawled out from the depths of his chest. A suave grin spread on his lips. Tie me back up, Senku. Closing his eyes, Senku sported his own smirk. When he opened them again, he went to do what was asked of him. Zeno provided some additional input. This time, secure it to the bed frame. Otherwise, though I may not have good dexterity, I still wouldn't be able to move about the room as I pleased. Senku tugged on the frame firmly, to assure there wasn't some kind of hidden weakness in it that Zeno had already ascertained. It felt sturdy. In fact, it looked like the frame was bolted directly to the walls of the ship. Senku wondered why he even bothered to check. It seemed like Zeno was doing some kind of weird mind game right now. He knew he couldn't escape if he tried. At least for right now. He didn't have any other option to get one over on Senku but to mess with his head. So the question was, why is Zeno trying to reinforce to him that he isn't to be trusted instead of doing the obvious at attempting to gain his trust? No clue. He'll run this by Gen in the morning. That's his forte. Zeno offered his wrists. Senku wrapped the ropes around them, not too tight, lifting his arms above his head, the movement causing his shirt to untuck itself. Zeno let himself be tethered to the metal post. Once it had been done, Senku pulled back, observing his mentor's face as harsh shadows cut across it. Holding eye contact with his former student, dark eyes challenged him to search into what was hidden within them. It was obvious Zeno's presence was domineering. His vulnerability was merely perceived. Mercifully, Zeno let go of eye contact before Senku could fall into the abyss of his oppressive gaze. The older man cleared his throat, bringing Senku back to reality. One last thing, then I'll let you get some rest. What is it, Zeno? Senku wondered eagerly, wanting to get it over with. Zeno met his eyes. Take off my belt, he demanded plainly. Sure, but Senku tilted his head playfully. Can't you ask a little nicer? With great difficulty, Zeno repressed an eye roll. Would you please? That was fine enough for Senku. He looked down at the task at hand, and the realization of what he'd just agreed to sank in. Senku felt heat creep up the back of his neck. It was a bulky utility belt. Of course, it wouldn't be comfortable to sleep in. It wasn't anything weird. Zeno was trying to embarrass him, wasn't he? Senku's eyes darted back up to Zeno's amused expression. He knew any pleasure he derived from this was purely from being a nuisance. At least, he assumed so. Senku had hesitated longer than he'd realized. What's keeping you? Zeno inquired, almost as if he already knew the answer. He didn't know what to say. Rushed hands took hold of the buckle and pulled it out of the rivets. Senku discarded the belt off the side of the bed quickly, letting out a relieved sigh once the deed was done. Zeno opened his mouth to speak. Senku interjected. "Shut up and go to sleep." His mentor complied, shutting his mouth. Senku fell back onto his spot on the bed, bringing the blanket up over himself and Zeno. His back to him, Senku situated himself as far away as he could before he risked falling off in his sleep. The bedside lamp flicked off, coating the room in a serene darkness. A melody of crashing waves, the steady creaking of the boat, and each other's breathing lulled them both. After a few long silent minutes, a whisper entwined itself into the atmosphere. "Good night, Senku." Senku turned onto his back, already asleep. He hadn't heard Zeno's wishes. It was starting to become hard to keep his eyes open any longer. Zeno finally relaxed. When he untensed his arms, his wrists slipped free from the loose rope that bound them. Zeno opened his eyes. Oh, he held his hand in front of his face, as if he was imagining things in the dark. He looked back to Senku. He was smirking.